as we cross over this morning into opening our imaginations and our whole lives to engaging Scripture, to let these words fall afresh and anew and wade into the water of this beautiful story. I encourage you, as you listen to these words, to have this question on your heart. Which character in this narrative that I'm about to read to you do you connect with most closely? Which character that I'm about to read to you kind of sits there in the pew next to you, tapping you on the shoulder as if to say, that's totally you, you know. So hear now these words from 2 Kings. Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man and in high favor with his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man, though a mighty warrior, suffered from leprosy. How many of you this morning maybe feel like you're wearing Naaman's sandals? Is there some illness that you're living with that you've tried to maybe push down and put a smile on your face? Or maybe it isn't a physical ailment as much as it is a dis-ease, a restlessness within your soul that you're struggling with. How many of us live with that kind of tension? On the one hand, we count our blessings. We see the beauty of life. And yet, on the other hand, it isn't always well with our soul. There are stresses and strains, both physical and spiritual and emotional and mental. Naaman was that kind of person. He lived with that tension. He was, on the one hand, a great leader. He was General Patton and Will Smith from Independence Day rolled into one. And yet, he also had this illness, this disease, some kind of skin condition that he lived with, that he struggled with, that he suffered from. How many of us have at one time or another worn Naaman's sandals? We've lived with that tension between blessing and brokenness or illness. The story continues on. Now the Arameans, on one of their raids, had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She told her mistress, "If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy." This wonderful young woman who's been captured and taken to a foreign land is essentially powerless in some ways, is faced with a choice. And see if this choice maybe feels familiar to you. She could, on the one hand, stand silently on the sidelines. She could watch Naaman suffer with her arms crossed, thinking, serves him right. What goes around comes around. He messed with the wrong God this time when he took me captive, right? That's where she could stand. But instead, she chooses another path. She chooses, because I think she's experienced God's unconditional grace and unceasing love, she chooses to share that with Naaman. She passes on the good news. She witnesses and testifies to God's presence in all people's lives. Is there a situation in your life right now, maybe a relationship where those feel like the sandals you're wearing, where maybe there's a person and you're not sure, should I speak up and say something? And if I do, how do I speak the truth in love? How do I somehow or other communicate God's unconditional grace and unceasing love? How do I share that in a meaningful way? This young woman, the story turns on her. If she had chosen to keep silent, this story probably never would have made it into Scripture. But no, she chooses to speak out. She chooses to find her voice and witness to God's love. And so Naaman goes, and he told his Lord just what the young woman had said from the land of Israel. And the king of Aram said, "Go then, and I will send along a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman went, and he took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, 10 sets of garments, 3 calling birds, 2 French hens. That kind of feels that way, doesn't it? I mean, there's Christmas trees out already. He brings with him this huge amount of items. He comes in this great caravan racing down the road with optimism, with hope. And he also brings with him a letter to the king of Israel, which read, "When this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy." Notice, the people in power have misheard. They've misunderstood. The young girl was very clear in her witness that it was the prophet. But the way the king heard that, and the way the king translates that, and Naaman as well, is to think, oh, I must have to go to the most powerful person. He must be the one who's in charge over there. One of the things that I so love about Shore and this organization and our meeting tomorrow night is that we celebrate, we name the truth. That our power, it doesn't come from money. It doesn't come from any one of our titles or any one of our own prestige. Our power comes from us together. Us together, think about that profoundly, 15 different churches and growing day by day. That's where our power comes from coming together to work alongside each other and speaking that truth in love to those who are in power. When the king of Israel read this letter, he tore his clothes and said, "Am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look. See how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me." People in power continue to misunderstand, misread, mishear what folks are trying to say. But that isn't just about people in power, that's me. How often do I sometimes misunderstand, mishear someone? Someone says something to me and I think I understand, but I'm not listening. I'm not hearing. I ever have that? You're talking to someone and you're 2 steps ahead in the conversation and you mishear what they're really trying to say to you. The king gets caught up in his own power, and he throws a 2-year-old temper tantrum as a response to it. Are you this morning wearing the shoes of the king? Are you finding a tough situation, you don't know what to do with it, and you just want to stomp your feet and say, it's not fair? If that's where you're at this morning, the king is the one tapping you on the shoulder. But when Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had tore his clothes, he sent a message to the king. Why? Why have you torn your clothes? Let this person come to me, that he may know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and his chariot, and remember all that gold and silver and the piles of clothes, and he halts at the entrance of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, "Go, wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean." I have to picture Elisha sitting there, maybe working on his sermon or stressed out over some situation with the people of God, and he glances up, and there's Naaman with his caravan, the camels, and the cacophony, the noise, and the cloud of dust that's coming right at him, inching, and he hears Naaman knocking on the door, but he doesn't go. He doesn't respond. He doesn't darken the doorway. He doesn't respond to him. In some ways, I read this passage and think, worst pastoral visit ever. He just sends a message that Naaman should go and wash in the river. And Naaman responds. Naaman, now it's his turn to get angry. He goes away saying, I thought for me, surely he would have come out. I thought that he would stand here, call on the name of his God, maybe even wave his hand over me, and he'd cure my leprosy. It's about expectations. It's about our own expectations. So often, I think when I get angry at a situation, when I get frustrated with something in my life, You know, sometimes it's what somebody else has done or said, but sometimes it's about my expectations. I thought something else was going to happen, and when it didn't, it's not fair, right? I've been in Naaman's shoes in that moment as well. He continues on, "Are not Abadah and Parfa, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Are not the waters in Iowa even better?" That might not be in your translation, by the way. It's just in mine. "Could I not wash in them and be cleaned?" He turned and he went away in rage. Those expectations all of us have, that from time to time we need to get out and lay honestly on the table in our connections with ourselves, with God, and with each other. And it's important. If we're angry, it's important to name that for what it is, but to examine and to invite God to sit alongside us and examine that along with us. But his servants, Naaman's servants, approached him and said, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said was, 'Go, wash, and be clean'?" And so he went down. He immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan according to the word of the man of God. And his flesh was restored like the flesh of a young boy, and he was clean. It's a beautiful part of the passage. Beautiful because notice that Naaman is listening. He's trying his best, I think, to listen. And notice that he's listening to those who oftentimes, in this time, wouldn't have been listened to at all. He's listening to the least and the lost and the lonely. He's listening to those who do not have power. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And Mr. Rogers, you might remember, was an ordained Presbyterian pastor. But one of the things that I always remember him saying in one of his books was, when you wonder where God's at, look at the periphery. God's always there, working along the fringes. Because you know what happens when I get angry, when I get frustrated, when my expectations are not met? That's a narrowing down. I start to put on blinders and my vision gets blurred and it's like cotton balls in my ears. But Naaman's willing to go another way. He listens to those around him. Now, when I read this passage, I have to think that when Naaman went down, he wasn't singing about going down to the river to pray. He wasn't talking about, shall we gather at the river. He wasn't singing, wade in the water. I think he was thinking to himself, this is the most idiotic thing I have ever done in my life. There are those moments, right? I carry with me experiences when I'm driving in my car. Bitterness is my co-pilot, and bitterness has picked the radio station for me. I'm thinking, this is a waste of time, but I get there. I get to my destination. And who opens the door but God's grace? Ever had one of those moments where your expectations, you thought, why in the world am I doing it? But it ends up being an encounter with the holy. It ends up being a transformative, changing moment in your life. That's what Naaman experiences. And usually in the story, this is where we end it. We end it, we think, hooray, he's been cured. 3 cheers for Elisha for clearing him. End of story, let's move on. But look, there's still more. Because Naaman returned to the man of God. He and all of his company, that whole caravan, comes running back. And this time, Elisha stood before him. They have an interaction. He says, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. Please accept a present from your servant. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives whom I serve, I will accept nothing. But Naaman urged him to accept, and Elisha again refused. That's what we do sometimes with God's grace, right? We turn God's grace into a quid pro quo. You know, we can't accept it just as pure gift in our life. We feel like we have to do something in return. Somehow or another, we want to earn God's grace. We take the unconditional part, that adjective, away from describing God's grace. But grace is. grace is pure gift. There is nothing we can do to earn it. There is nothing we can do in response. It is a gift unto our lives that we, like Naaman, are called to accept, called to let sit upon our very lives. And so Naaman then said, well, if not, then please let 2 mule loads of earth be given to your servant. For your servant no longer is going to offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god except Yahweh. And may Yahweh pardon your servant on one account. When my master, the king back in Arab, goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, he's going to lean on my arm. And when he bows down, I'm going to have to bow down in the house of Rimmon. And when I do bow down in the house of Rimmon, may the Lord pardon your servant on this one account. And Elisha said to him, no, you have to stand up for what you believe in. No, that isn't what Elisha says. That isn't at all what Elisha says. Elisha simply says, go in peace. There are 2 things that are happening here in that beautiful ending to this story. The first is, as pointed out by Rob Bell when he was talking about this, he reminds us that in those days they were tribal gods. Everybody in every land had their own God, and it was intimately interwoven with the soil in those times. And so part of what Naaman wants to do is he wants to take back that soil for something to cling to. He wants to hold on to something. He wants a sort of religious souvenir. How many of us have done that? We've had some great experience and we want to bring something back with us. But we can't. We can't freeze time. Time and life and our faith continue to flow on like this water. Time and life continues to move on, and that moment drifts away. We can't cling to any kind of experience. We just let it wash over us and stay with us to the best of our ability. The other thing that's going on here is that Elisha is offering Naaman grace. He doesn't hold him accountable. He realizes that God moves in mysterious, amazing, sometimes uncontrollable ways in our lives. And we do what we need to do. We respond as we need to respond. And in all times and in all places, we try to be open for God's peace. I'm so glad this morning that we have this big, beautiful bowl of water before us. And I welcome back those who have been up north this summer. We've been talking over the last several weeks about our long-range plan. What are we going to be? How are we going to try to live? And we've said it really falls into 2 categories. Worship on Sunday morning, that when we come into this sacred space, we expect, we anticipate, we prayerfully hope and look for ways to encounter God's presence here and now in this hour. That's what we long for on Sunday mornings. That's what we thirst for. We hunger and want God to quench and encounter God's presence here. That's what this hour is all about. But it isn't just about this hour. You don't need to take some of the dirt from 1031 South Euclid with you when you leave today. What you take with you is this experience of grace in this hour. But that grace isn't just for you. You pass along that grace to others. You share that grace with those you encounter. People here in our church when we gather to study and talk and support each other in good times and in bad. We gather around this living water, the well of Christ. And we bring this water, this grace and love to those who feel lost and lonely and left out. We brought this water. This water, our lives were present yesterday at Sarasota Pride. We'll bring this water with us tomorrow night when we gather at Shore. We carry it with us when we go to Resurrection House, to All Faiths Food Pantry, to those of you who minister to people who are in prison, to those who feel like God has forgotten them. This water, our very lives, is what we have to share. It's about relationship. Relationship with God and relationship with each other. That's our long-range plan. And my My prayer isn't some long list of things that we're going to accomplish. My prayer is that we'll gather and that we'll be open to God's guidance and grace, that we'll try a few things. And what succeeds, we'll try to continue. And if it doesn't work, we'll try again. Because we worship God. God who is still speaking. God who is still calling out to us to not just hold on to grace and love, but to share it. To share it with each other and with the world God so loves. And if we can do that, brothers and sisters, we will sense peace. Amen.